I don't believe poets write poetry. I think poetry writes poets. I think poetry is the highest excellence. It's in the fewest words, the greatest thoughts of man. And somehow it comes through the poet. The poet is the medium. That's what I've always believed.
Greta Rana is undoubtedly a towering figure in Nepali literature, especially for those writers who write in English. I mean, there are just a handful of writers, and to have already published 7 poetry collections to her credit and 7 prose, 7 fiction, is indeed a huge contribution to the Nepali literature. She has carved her niche not only as a poet, but also as a novelist and a playwright.
And nothing personal. This is my signature poem. It has 3 parts to it, each for a time in my life. The first part is called The Child. It is nothing personal. Remembrances of cold winter afternoons, dead ashes in the grate, greasy dishes in the sink, islands in the grey-blue suds water, waiting for the beach boat of frozen ash-worn hands. It was nothing personal. Work-worn mother-lode, leaning on a child, schooled to obey. Weary, cold away, far from the one hearth-fire, where green spirits danced in flames, warming small chapped knees. All yesterdays are in these hands, all seasons of discontent engraved into their veins. It was nothing personal at all. I was born in a coal mining town, but I was not from a coal mining family. And I remember that was of great chagrin, in a way, to me and to my sister, because we were from a family that had come to that town from outside, or centuries before. But they had, in a sense, been cleared from their original place because of politics. And they were middle class, and everybody else was working class. So I remember when we went to school, my father was a politician, and he used, shall I say, the Yorkshire accent. I always used to notice, even when I was a child, that when my father was making a political speech, he was a district politician. When he was making a political speech, then he would exaggerate his Yorkshire accent. And on the other hand, my mother was from a coal mining family, and she was generally thought to have married above her station when she married my father. But she was a school teacher, a particularly good school teacher as well. And she would walk my sister and I home from school and make us speak what she called properly, without the Yorkshire accent. And my sister and I, we hated that because when we were in school, people used to say, "Oh, Penningtons are posh. Penningtons are posh." So we would go to bed at night and talk to each other in dialect. We were determined never to lose that Yorkshire accent. The other thing that I remember is that whereas at weekends other children got to go to the Saturday matinees and watch Billy the Kid and Roy Rogers, our parents took us to museums. I'm very familiar with the city of York, which has some really splendid museums, and we'd have all our weekends were occupied with going to this museum, this cathedral, that cathedral. And I remember that because what I remember most of all is how my feet ached from going around all these darn museums. And then what I remember about York is that when we were in York, we'd always have lunch at a place called Shambles Cafe. It's still there today. And I think they still have the famous mixed grill. And I always remember as kids, when we were going around the museums in the morning, we were always thinking, when are we going to get to the cafe? When are we going to have that mixed grill? And then I suppose the other thing I remember is my high school. It was the same school that my mother and grandfather had gone to. And it was also the school that the famous sculptor Henry Moore had gone to. I suppose I always liked poetry. My mother read to us from Winnie the Pooh. I was very fond of Winnie the Pooh. And The House at Pooh Corner. And I suppose it was by reading Winnie the Pooh that I really came to this very, very unique thing of how you can play with words and they can come out meaning not what their original meaning is, but have a hidden meaning also. When our brother was being born, very, very youngest, we had to stay at my maternal grandmother's while my mother was in hospital. And because my maternal relatives were from a coal mining community, we got for the first time to not go to museums at the weekend, but we got to go to the Saturday matinees. And it was there that I was introduced to the wonderful, wonderful legend of Billy the Kid. And the first poem I ever wrote myself was about Billy the Kid. It's called A Faithful Friend. I can still remember the end of it. The faithful friend is his horse. Faithful. At the end of it, Billy the Kid is in a grave, and it says, "Here Billy the Kid of the prairie, who was sinful and wicked, died, and here is laid in the selfsame grave, Old Faithful, his horse by his side." That was the first poem I ever wrote. Leaving home. Gone, the pebble on the beach, swallowed by acres of soft sand, all smooth now unrippled surface of daily concerns burying you. You are part of a collective memory, existing only if the past, recalled, should emerge choking from seas of heavier affairs. Milk frozen on the doorstep. The dust cart missed our house. And in the bathroom, a water pipe leaks. You share a space cherished by them for important matters. Bills that must be paid. The mechanics of modern living vanquish the child who leaves home. Nothing personal. I wanted to be an actress, to tell you the truth. And I was offered a scholarship to the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art based on a role I played in high school, which was the role of Emily in Our Town by Thornton Wilder. I don't know if you're familiar with that play. But when the RADA Scout came to offer the scholarship, my parents were called to the headmasters to meet him. And my mother said, I never forget it, I use it in my literature. She got up and she said to my father, who she bullied enormously, even though he was the higher status, so to speak. She said, "Don't be silly, Fred. She's going to university." I've never heard of anything so ridiculous in my life. And anyway, you have to be good looking to be an actress. And she gathered my father and walked out of the headmaster's study. The headmaster couldn't get over it. But that stayed with me through my life. And for a long, long time, I wouldn't even look in a mirror because my mother had said, you have to be good looking to be an actress, which meant, to me anyway, that my mother thought I wasn't good looking. The following year, I threw myself into the O-levels. I got 10 O-levels, mostly A's. And then I had 5 A-levels 2 years later. And I was offered a place at Oxford University. And I had gone down there for an interview and decided that it wasn't for me. You know, it was too far from home and the people were too, not my type, you know, they were too bourgeois. And I then decided I'd just go to Teachers Training College. And I did go for an interview in Birmingham. And in Birmingham, they looked at my marks and they said, "Why do you want to come to Teachers Training College?" And I said, "Because I want to be a teacher." And they said, "Well, we're not accepting you because you should go to university." I always remember that interview because I was for 3 days in Birmingham and they lodged us in a youth hostel where there'd been a series of murders. And I remember it was awful trying to get to sleep at night and thinking about the murders. But anyway, that passed off. And then when my A-level results finally came, I had offers from several universities, but the one that I decided to go to was Manchester. The reason why was that all the other universities I had put to study English. and all the other universities were offering English literature. And Manchester was the one that was offering English language and literature. You had to do the English language. And when I looked at the curriculum, you also had to do Latin to BA general level. And I was very good at Latin. So to Manchester I went. Well, first of all, I should say that I was always a bit of a rebel. And when I got to Manchester, there was a Freshers' Week. And the thing about Manchester was that until a very, very long time ago, only 3% of women got into Manchester University. So in those days, I was one of the 3%. And I remember in Freshers' Week, myself and a girl I'd befriended, we were sitting in the Union Bar. And there were some male students from Durham, what we call Geordies. And they were really drunk. And I remember them saying to us to get off the couch, and that in any case there was no room for women in universities. Women should know their place. And I remember I was drinking a Guinness, and I got so annoyed that I got up and I poured this Guinness on the head of this fellow who said that. And then, of course, myself and my newfound friend, we had to run away. We took a place together in an approved lodging that belonged to a Pakistani fellow who was a wrestler. Okay, and we were on the second floor. Maduka's apartment was just above ours. I remember that Maduka had a television set. Now, the thing about my friend and I was we were both ardent fans of Coronation Street. Coronation Street was the first television series to ever go on BBC. It was it's still running today. So you can imagine how successful it was. We had been following Coronation Street, but when we came to university, the only way you could catch up on it was to see it in the student lounge. And of course, there were only 3% of women. So we'd go along and there'd be all these male students watching rugby. And so we had no chance. And so this fellow who was living above us, whom I thought was Mexican, he had a television. So I said to Janet, let's ask that Mexican if we can watch his television. And she said, oh, don't be so cheeky. You don't know him. And I said, I don't have to know him. But if he lets us watch his television, we can see Coronation Street. So I went upstairs and I knocked on the door, and Maduka was there, and he was wearing a poncho. Actually, it was a Mexican poncho, which is why I thought he was Mexican. And I said, oh, we were wondering, my friend and I, if you'd mind if we watched our favourite serial on your television. It comes on every night at 7 o'clock. And he was very gracious and he said, fine. And so we started going at 7 o'clock every evening to his apartment, watching Coronation Street. Because I was the secretary of the Nuclear Disarmament, CND, of Manchester University, the BBC used to send me every week free tickets for a show called Top of the Pops. And I didn't go to Top of the Pops, but I used to distribute these tickets to other students. Really what the BBC just wanted was people to dance while they were doing their Top of the Pops. And I said to Janet, I'll give him 2 tickets for him and his girlfriend and thank him for letting us see the television, and we leave it at that. And she agreed, so I put the 2 tickets in an envelope and sealed it and wrote on it, for you and your girlfriend, and I shoved it under the door. And we came downstairs, and that was that. Then came Saturday night, a knock at the door at about 6:30, and there was he, all dressed to kill. And he looked me up and down. I was a bit of a beatnik, you know. He looked me up and down and he said, "You're not going like that, are you?" And I realized the mistake. And I said, No, that ticket isn't for me. That ticket is for your girlfriend. And he said, "Oh, she's gone." And so I went back inside and I got changed and we went to Top of the Pops, and we came back along from the BBC along a road in Manchester called Upper Brook Street. It's a very, very long road. Along this road, there was a restaurant called the Anglo-Asia Restaurant. And he said, "Have you ever had Indian food?" And I said, "No." He said, "Well, would you like to try?" And I said, "Well, okay." We went to Anglo-Asia and we had Indian food. And then, when the bill came, he put his hand in his pocket and he said, "I've forgotten my wallet. Have you got any money?" And I ended up paying for the whole damn thing. And that was the beginning. Maduka, he was offered a scholarship in Canada, and he wanted me to go with him. And so that I would, he asked me to marry him. And I remember saying, "Now don't make fun of a very serious matter." And he said, "I'm not making fun." So we did get married and we went to Canada. We lived in Canada for more than 5 years. And we came back, leaving Ontario. I gave my youth to the Agate Arms of Ontario. And the son born in the shimmering Northland returned to receive his due. He will go his pixie ways among blue-veined ice forests, loitering under red gold leaves, as I did throughout those years when he was a womb whisper. I gifted him with a memory of trees heavy with lush dark leaves, veined like an old woman's hand against the summer sky. Then, when snows begin to fall, they shrivel, cowering close to land, and they drop tears of silver, grieving for lost days of long ago, as do I now, that I must go.
Since 1971, from the time she came here as a young white woman married to a Nepali man, I think Greta has experienced, has adapted to the Nepali culture, and she has brought out the stories of Nepali women in different sectors. I think her major characters, the theme of her novels have always been the downtrodden people, especially the women and their struggles, the difficulties that they face as a homemaker and as a working woman. And these experiences have been very nicely portrayed in her books.
Sunrise on Basant Panchami. Flames in the river as fields creep into day. Ghosts swirling in the mists. Ice rings my fingers like bells on the feet, marking the rhythm of a dance. I awake to the shock of surviving once more to renew the covenant of life with a borrowed miracle of breath. Birds gossip among the reeds, yet are gone in a trance. Sunrise sets them free, not we.
Talking about Greta's poetry, there's a theme of identity, loss, hope, despair, disillusionment, yet they're so profound and they're deeply moving. As a woman, I don't know if it is, I feel deeply connected to her poetry as a woman because I see a lot of myself, the human emotions that we women really have, the searching of our soul, the searching of our home, these are embedded in her poetry. This could be because she has lived about 40 years away from her home, and despite Nepal being her second home, there is always this sense of loneliness and deep desire to be, when she talks about her country, when she talks about the town that she grew up in, a very small town that she grew up in, her mother's struggles in bringing up the children, her affinity, close affinity with her father. There's always this kind of sense of belonging and identity in her poetry. What I love about Greta's prose is her wacky sense of humor, despite all the odds the characters face in her novels. I first read Greta's Hidden Woman, that was way back, and for me it was a welcome change from the Nepali writing, how Nepali writing, what are the characters and the themes of Nepali writing these days. They are the general characters that you see in your everyday life, but to bring out those women, hidden women, to bring out those women of the Rana dynasty who were not, the front voices or who were not visible women, let's say. That was a welcome change because, especially what happens in in these households is that there are boo-boos and there are those caretakers and all who have always got powerful roles. Even the queens have always got the powerful roles, though they are not very visible. And Hidden Women portrayed all these kind of women's, the concubines, the caretakers of the dynasty. And that was a welcome change for me to read something starkly different from what generally is written in Nepali literature, especially those writing in English. And then another book that really moved me was Hostage. Hostage was different from other novels, and the central character for once is a male, and it involves the real life incident of people taken into hostage in the Middle East and how the Nepali men were killed. So this novel was starkly different from what she generally writes. Apart from that, my latest read about from Greta Rana is Ghosts in the Bamboo. Ghosts in the Bamboo is starkly different from her other novels, and this is the second of the series, and it is indeed a delight to know that Greta has already completed the third of the series, which will be soon published. Ghosts in the Bamboo is set in an imaginary land called Lapalistan, and this Lapalistan, when I talked to her after after reading the book, when I talked to her, this Lapalistan is basically an amalgamation of Laos, Afghanistan, and Pakistan, where she worked during her easy mode days. And the character Eleanor is very much like Greta Rana herself. She's a nurse. She's a white woman married to a lap man and called Kim, who is very different. And for her, she always wants to become a playwright, like Greta herself wanted to become a playwright, and she had the dreams, of doing plays. So this woman is very much a Greta herself. I think this is the closest character which resembles her life.
Most things said in the least words, It's the highest excellence. I really don't know. I think it speaks to the soul, whereas prose speaks to the mind. I think if it has any purpose, it's to reach out to the spiritual in people. I always feel ill before a poem comes. I don't know why, but it's always been like that. And as I said before, I don't think I write poetry. I think poetry comes through me. And I think that's why I feel ill before I write. And then the words play around in my head for a long, long time before I actually put it down on paper. I once referred to it as Shabda Kelauni, playing with words. They go through your brain. All of a sudden you get a kind of a flash, and there's this sequence of words that comes, and it won't leave you. It just won't leave. And I think that's why I don't feel well before I put it down on paper. And then once I've put it down, it's a kind of catharsis. And I'm okay again. And then I can go for a long time without writing poetry. Well, it started when I'd never written prose. It started after I came to Nepal. Of course I'd written prose. I'd written school essays and all that kind of thing. And my English teacher always said, "Oh, you should write and keep on writing." But I never bothered with prose. And then one day there was this international book fair in Delhi, and Nepal didn't have any books except in Nepali. And of course, in Delhi, they had to be in English. And I remember Heyman Dixit came to me and he asked if I would write some novels for this international book fair. And I wrote 3. The first one was a kind of a teenagey novel called Nothing Greener. And then the next one was called Distant Hills. And I always thought that's for sort of housewives, And there are still people who read it even today. But the third one I called Right As It Is. And after I'd finished it and put my pen down, I thought to myself, oh my God, I can really write novels. What happened is that my father-in-law used to drive us down Kupandol, and Diamond Shamsher used to come walking by, and he'd call out to my father-in-law, "Hey, my ladai, hi." And then one day he came to him and he said, your Bwari is English. Will she translate my novel, Seto Bag? And my father-in-law just said yes. Without any consultation, he said yes. And I thought, oh my God, how am I going to do this? So I bought myself a whopping great big dictionary and I set about it. It took me 4 years in all to translate that book. Well, I met Dhruva Chandra Gautam in Tribhuvan University Library. Shanti Misra had called me because he wanted to interview me. We were talking in those days, it was Panchayat days. You know, in Panchayat days, there was a lot of censorship, and it was very oppressive. And I just happened to mention that I'd often thought of starting a Pen Nepal, and he had thought of the same thing. So together at that interview, we decided that we would do so. And he was the one who got to join Pen International. To have a pen centre in any country, you have to have 20 published writers to sign in and to sign the Pen Charter. Gautam got the 20 people to sign. I think the 20 original signees are still alive. That year I went to Canada, I think, and Gautam went also. We went there and we were admitted into Pen International. The year I was leaving ISIMOD, I was retiring from ISIMOD, I was sitting at my desk and the phone rang, and it was the first secretary of the British Embassy. And he said to me, I just want to ask you, were you born in Britain? And I said, yes, I was born in Leeds. Oh, he said, well, I want to tell you that you've been nominated for an MBE in the New Year's Honours List. And I said, my God, whatever for? And he said, never mind whatever for. Will you accept it? And so I said, well, yes. And I hesitated a bit because I remember my father, who was a staunch Labourite, he had turned down a knighthood in the belief that, you know, you shouldn't be greater than everybody else. And without thinking about what he'd say about it, I accepted it. But as it turned out, my father was delighted. And I remember going to Buckingham Palace to get the MBE and meeting the Queen.
Apart from all the other dimensions in literature, Greta's contribution as a playwright also has to be acknowledged. She has been adapting Shakespeare plays and then directing it. And in 2018, the new Shakespeare Valas, they came up with a theatrical performance on Shakespeare's Midsummer Night's Dream. And again, hopefully they're coming out with yet another play for which the rehearsals are yet to begin. And Greta is very excited to once again direct As You Like It.
There was a theatre group at the British Embassy called the Sterling Club, and it was run by Glenn Tulip, who was the English teacher at Budanikanta. And one day she called me and she asked me if I'd play a role in a play, and it was Pass the Butler by Monty Python. Anyway, what happened was that was during the time when the government had decided that the English teachers at Budanikanta would be replaced by Nepalis, and Gwen lost her job, and she could no longer run the Sterling Club. She had to fend for herself. And so I became the director. What the Sterling Club did with their profits, they gave all their profits to Nepal Britain Society. Nepal Britain Society had a scholarship fund for the daughters of poor families who couldn't afford to educate them. And myself and Anne Griffith, we did a number of plays under the Sterling Club. A new ambassador came and he closed down the Sterling Club. So that was the end of the drama club. And Nepal Britain Society didn't have any way of replenishing their scholarship fund. Pratima Pandey had just become the president, and I like Pratima enormously. And the scholarship fund was depleted. And I said to her, and Sterling Club was no more. That ambassador, he'd closed down the Sterling Club. So I said to her, we're a registered society. You have a right to form a drama group under the auspices of the Nepal Britain Society. So why don't you do that? And I'll be the director. And she said, what shall we call it? So I said, New Shakespeare Wallers. And that's how New Shakespeare Wallers was born. And we didn't always do Shakespeare plays. I always told the New Shakespeare Wallers, in Nepal, you have to play a comedy. You can't play tragedy. Life is tragic enough without tragedy. So we'll play comedy. And we did do a number. We did Noises Off. It was a great success. And we did Importance of Being Earnest. The Importance of Being Earnest became our signature play. It was one that I'd done with St. Xavier's School when I was teaching there. And then we did A Midsummer Night's Dream. I always remember that. The Shakespeare Wallers were absolutely great. In actual fact, they were invited to Edinburgh to the Fringe Festival. But owing to the fact that we got no support from the government of Nepal, and that not all the Shakespeare Wallers could have afforded their tickets, some of them could, but not all of them. And then for me, I had to hire the venue in Edinburgh. We just didn't go. And I never forgive the Nepal Academy at the time for being so mean, that they couldn't support us. Because they were really splendid. That was a really great play. That I didn't spend my life in Yorkshire. Married to some upright Yorkshireman. No. I think everything that happened, as my Quaker ancestors would have said, everything was meant. And I don't regret it, not at all. I always said, Nepal is a privilege, and it is.
Personally, Greta Rana's influence in my life has been huge. Since the time I knew her during the Summer Arts Festival that happened a couple of years ago in Shaligram, I've known her as a woman who's always very passionate about her work, a woman with a wacky sense of humor who keeps us in split all the time, a woman who's very encouraging, and I think, her writing journey, her direction, they should not stop. Thank you would be a very tiny word for all your contributions, Greta Rana, for all the contributions that you have made in literature, for the influence you've had on people who you work with, especially me, since the time I've known you as a writer and as a person. You've been phenomenal. You've always kept embracing us. You've always encouraged us. And I wish you a very good health, primarily the best of health and happiness. And I hope you continue your writing journey with the same amount of passion and dedication. All the best.
The end. In the end, it will call you in a time of wizened leaves, parched with the skin of old age. In the end, you will remember the sweet smell of yesterday, to which you owe your space. Blood is thicker than water, and the blood lays heavy claims on the heart. What passed between is no more than a moonbeam, an enchanted hour seduced out of the hope chest of the world. Home, womb, home, the one. They will call you in the end. It's nothing personal.